Following the rare Covenant defeat in orbit over Earth, only a single Covenant carrier managed to slip down to the surface of the planet. This carrier, containing the Prophet of Regret, one of the 3 high prophets within Covenant society, positioned itself over the East African megacity of New Mombasa. Positioned over the city center, the supercarrier almost immediately began landing troops, UNSC forces being distracted in orbit, mopping up the remnants of the Covenant fleet. You see, while the initial Covenant assault had ultimately failed due to the Covenant simply not expecting humanity to be present on Earth, the single Covenant supercarrier that did slip through still posed a very significant threat to civilization on the planet. On top of that, this single supercarrier was now calling for help, sending out a distress signal trying to summon more Covenant forces to the planet. Having successfully defeated the Covenant forces in orbit, Master Chief, who had led infantry forces both during the Battle of Installation 04 and during the fighting in orbit over Earth, rendezvoused with the UNSC in Amber Clad, a Starwalt-class frigate, and began making their way to the surface of the planet. When the Amber Clad arrived over the greater Mombasa area, the deployment of UNSC ground forces had already begun. Nearby garrisons had deployed a number of armor and infantry units into the old Mombasa regions. Meanwhile, the downtown area, the area formerly known as New Mombasa, had primarily fallen to Covenant control, with the Covenant supercarrier hovering basically right over it. The Covenant had deployed a large number of infantry and vehicles and had begun trying to set up a logistical network on the surface using transports and other various means of moving troops around to try to shore up their defenses, as well as deploying at least one Scarab in an effort to overwhelm UNSC ground forces. With the arrival of the Amber-clad, an additional garrison of troops from on board the frigate were able to be deployed to the city. This garrison was led by Marine Staff Sergeant Avery Johnson and included the Master Chief. The Pelicans deployed from the Amber-clad were likely destined for the downtown area in an attempt to board the Covenant carrier. However, they were intercepted by the Scarab that had been deployed earlier and ultimately shot down. With the initial attempt on the Covenant carrier now defunct, the UNSC forces on the ground had to try to rally and prepare a follow-up assault, with the idea of using a majority of the UNSC forces in the city to basically act like a battering ram and force their way through to the landing zone. UNSC forces rallied their way through Old Mombasa and began making their way towards the main bridge that connected Old Mombasa with New Mombasa. Meanwhile, UNSC forces in orbit were preparing another plan in an effort to take down the Covenant carrier. This plan came from above. A group of orbital drop shock troopers from the UNSC Say My Name would attempt to land on top of the Covenant carrier and board the vessel from above. While they were preparing in orbit for their drop, UNSC forces were making their way across the bridge and fighting to the city center. After clearing the city center and destroying the Scarab deployed by Covenant ground forces, the Master Chief was able to be picked up by a Pelican. However, at this time, the slip space drive on board the Covenant carrier was now being charged, and it could be effectively deciphered that the Covenant were preparing to make a slip space jump inside of the city, something that would leave the city in ruin. It's around this time that the UNSC Say My Name began deploying its orbital drop shock troopers down towards the Covenant carrier. And while the Covenant carrier was making its jump to slip space, the Amber-clad, now with the Master Chief on board, were able to slip through the portal. The resulting blast, however, destroyed New Mombasa, causing significant damage to the city, and knocking the orbital drop shock troopers, who were on their way down from orbit, off course, forcing them to crash in the ruins of the city. At this point, the city had sustained significant damage from the initial Covenant assault, and was now crawling with Covenant ground troops, specifically in the city's center, deployed from the Covenant supercarrier. With dramatic political events going on inside the Covenant, a minor civil war broke out among the Covenant forces deployed to the city, with many of the Brute-led squads slaughtering the Elite-led squads. For the remainder of the day, the UNSC forces in the downtown area of New Mombasa remained scattered. However, it's likely that UNSC forces in the outer regions of the city, areas like Old Mombasa, were able to retake ground and push Covenant forces back into the city center, which remained under Covenant control for a majority of the day and into the following night. During that time, UNSC forces did attempt a few major rally points, most notably one at the Oni Alpha Site headquarters in the southern tip of New Mombasa. Ultimately, though, UNSC forces weren't able to hold the city for long. As the sun rose on the next morning, a much larger Covenant fleet arrived in system. With the UNSC forces in orbit devastated by the initial Covenant assault, they were basically unable to prevent the Prophet of Truth's much larger invasion fleet from pushing through to the surface. And as the sun was rising over New Mombasa, a new fleet of Covenant warships appeared appeared in the skies over the city. With this fleet in the skies over the city and the glassing of the city now beginning, the Battle of New Mombasa came to a close with a definitive Covenant victory, albeit a hard-fought one. This battle would not have occurred were it not for the engagement that had occurred in orbit immediately prior to this, and if you'd like to learn about the space battle over Earth prior to this engagement, I'll leave a link in the upper right-hand corner to the battle analysis on that. And if you have any other engagements you'd like to see covered in future episodes of Battle Analysis and added to the archive, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.